The year is 1789. France stands on a precipice. It is a nation of great beauty and culture, yet beneath the gilded surface, deep cracks are showing. The air itself seems to hum with a restless energy. People are whispering in the cafes of Paris. They talk of change, of rights, of a new way. For decades, perhaps even centuries, a storm has been brewing. The French Revolution was not a sudden squall. It was the culmination of years of frustration, inequality, and new dangerous ideas. It would reshape France. It would also send shockwaves across the entire world. Its echoes still felt today. This was a time of immense upheaval, a time when old certainties crumbled like ancient stone. The very foundations of society were shaken. Kings and queens, nobles and priests all found their power questioned. The ordinary people, long silent, began to find their voice. They demanded to be heard. They demanded fairness. They demanded bread. The revolution promised liberty, equality, and brotherhood. But it also delivered terror and bloodshed. It was a period of grand ideals and grim realities, a story of human hope and human cruelty intertwined in a dramatic dance. Understanding this revolution means looking at the lives of the people. Imagine a peasant farmer struggling to feed his family. Imagine a city worker toiling for meager wages while prices soared. Then imagine the aristocrat living in splendid luxury, paying few taxes. These contrasts were stark. They were unsustainable. The old order, the ancien regime, was teetering. It was heavy with tradition and privilege, but light on justice for the many. This imbalance was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The French Revolution is a complex tapestry woven with many threads. There are threads of economic hardship and social injustice. There are threads of political incompetence and royal indifference. And there are bright new threads of Enlightenment thought, ideas that spoke of reason and individual rights. Together, these threads would create a pattern of revolution, a pattern of violence, and ultimately, a pattern of profound change. We must explore these threads to understand the fabric of this momentous period in history. We must try to feel the hopes and fears of those who lived through it. France in the late 18th century was a kingdom deeply divided. Society was structured into 3 estates. This system was centuries old. The first estate was the clergy, the men of the church. They owned vast lands and paid very few taxes. The second estate was the nobility. They too enjoyed immense privileges. They held the top jobs in government and the army. They also paid little in taxes. Their lives were often ones of leisure and luxury, far removed from the struggles of ordinary folk. This created a deep sense of unfairness. Then there was the third estate. This was everyone else. It included peasants, city workers, doctors, lawyers, and merchants. They made up about 97% of the population, yet they had very few rights. Crucially, they bore almost the entire burden of taxation. Imagine the farmer, his crops failing after a harsh winter. He still had to pay taxes to the king, dues to his local lord, and a tithe to the church. This system was crippling. It bred resentment. It made people desperate for change. The weight of the nation rested on the shoulders of its poorest. Economic problems made things even worse. The French monarchy had spent lavishly for decades. Wars, especially the American Revolution where France aided the colonists, had drained the royal treasury. King Louis XVI's government was sinking into debt. To make matters worse, harvests were poor in the 1780s. The price of bread, the staple food for most French people, soared. Families went hungry, bakeries were looted. There was a growing sense of panic and anger. People could not understand why they starved while the rich feasted. This combination of social inequality and economic hardship was explosive. The third estate felt trapped. They worked hard but saw little reward. They paid taxes but had no say in how the country was run. They saw the opulence of the court at Versailles. They heard stories of Queen Marie Antoinette's extravagant spending. This fueled their anger. The gap between the rich and the poor was not just a gap, it was a chasm. And across this chasm, understanding and sympathy were in short supply. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. At the heart of this troubled kingdom sat King Louis XVI. He was not, perhaps, a deliberately cruel man, but he was indecisive. He was weak-willed. He struggled to understand the scale of the problems facing France. He preferred hunting and locksmithing to the difficult business of governing. When faced with calls for reform, he dithered. He would agree to changes, then backtrack under pressure from conservative nobles at court. This vacillation eroded any remaining trust the people might have had in him. He seemed incapable of leading France out of its crisis. Queen Marie Antoinette, his Austrian wife, did not help matters. She became a symbol of the monarchy's extravagance and detachment. Stories, some true, some wildly exaggerated, circulated about her lavish spending. The infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," though likely never uttered by her, captured the public's perception. She was seen as frivolous and out of touch with the suffering of her people. Her foreign birth also made her an easy target for suspicion and hatred. The Queen's unpopularity further weakened the position of the monarchy. She was a target for pamphlets and caricatures. The government itself was mired in inefficiency and corruption. Tax collection was chaotic and unfair. Royal officials were often more interested in enriching themselves than in serving the public. Attempts at financial reform by ministers like Turgot and Necker were blocked by powerful vested interests. These nobles and clergy did not want to give up their tax exemptions. The system was resistant to change from within. The king seemed unable or unwilling to force through the necessary measures to save the country from bankruptcy. This failure of leadership was critical. So the monarchy, once the symbol of France's strength and glory, appeared weak and incompetent. It was unable to solve the nation's pressing financial problems. It was unwilling to address the deep social inequalities. The king and queen seemed to live in a gilded cage at Versailles, isolated from the realities of French life. This created a vacuum of power and authority. Into this vacuum, new ideas and new leaders would soon rush. The people were losing faith in the divine right of kings. They were beginning to imagine a France without a king. While France struggled with debt and division, a revolution of the mind was already underway. This was the Enlightenment. It was an intellectual movement that championed reason, science, and individual rights. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu were its stars. Their books and pamphlets were read widely, at least by those who could read or afford them. Their ideas spread through salons, coffee houses, and even whispered conversations in the streets. They questioned everything. They challenged the old ways of thinking about society, government, and religion. Voltaire attacked religious intolerance and injustice. He called for freedom of speech and thought. Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote about the social contract. He argued that legitimate government came from the consent of the governed, not from God. He famously wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." This was a powerful message for people living under an absolute monarchy. Montesquieu, another influential thinker, advocated for the separation of powers in government. He believed this would prevent tyranny. These were radical ideas for their time. These Enlightenment ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, popular sovereignty, were intoxicating. They offered a vision of a better, fairer world. They suggested that people could change their own destiny. They did not have to accept their lot in life as divinely ordained. The success of the American Revolution just a few years earlier showed that these ideas could be put into practice. French soldiers who had fought in America returned with tales of a new republic founded on liberty. This inspired many in France. It showed that revolution was possible. The ideas of the Enlightenment provided the intellectual fuel for the French Revolution. They gave people a language to express their grievances. They gave them a framework for imagining a new kind of society. The old order, with its rigid hierarchy and divine right, seemed increasingly irrational and unjust when viewed through the lens of reason. The seeds of discontent were already sown by economic hardship. The Enlightenment provided the sunlight and water that would make them grow into a revolutionary movement. The call for fundamental change grew louder. Section 5. The storm gathers from Estates General to Bastille. By 1789, King Louis XVI was desperate. The royal finances were in ruins. He had no choice but to summon the Estates General. This was an old assembly, a kind of parliament, made up of representatives from the three estates. It had not met for 175 years. Its meeting in May 1789 at the Palace of Versailles was a momentous occasion. There was a sense of hope but also of tension. The Third Estate, representing the vast majority of the population, came with long lists of grievances. They demanded fair taxation and a greater say in government. Disagreements quickly arose over voting procedures. Traditionally, each estate voted as a bloc. This meant the First and Second Estates could always outvote the Third. The Third Estate demanded voting by head, where each deputy had one vote. This would give them a majority. The king and the privileged orders resisted. Frustrated, the deputies of the Third Estate took a bold step. On June 20th, 1789, they found themselves locked out of their usual meeting hall. They moved to a nearby indoor tennis court. There, they took the famous tennis court oath. They vowed not to disband until France had a new constitution. This act of defiance was a turning point. The Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly. They claimed to represent the true will of the French people. King Louis XVI was alarmed. He ordered troops to gather around Paris and Versailles. This created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion in the capital. Rumors spread that the king was planning to dissolve the National Assembly by force. The people of Paris, already suffering from food shortages, grew agitated. They began to arm themselves. They were determined to protect the gains made by the National Assembly. On July 14th, 1789, the storm finally broke. A large crowd, seeking weapons and gunpowder, marched on the Bastille. The Bastille was a medieval fortress in Paris, used as a state prison. It was a powerful symbol of royal tyranny. After a fierce battle, the crowd overwhelmed the defenders. They stormed the Bastille. Its governor was killed, his head paraded on a pike. The fall of the Bastille was a symbolic victory. It showed that the people could defeat the forces of the king. It marked the true beginning of the revolution. News spread like wildfire, igniting popular uprisings across France. Section 6. Revolutionary fervor, declarations, and new orders. The fall of the Bastille unleashed a wave of revolutionary energy across France. In the countryside, peasants rose up against their feudal lords. This period was known as the Great Fear. They burned manor houses and destroyed records of feudal dues. They wanted to end centuries of servitude. In response to this chaos and the spirit of change, the National Assembly moved quickly. On the night of August 4th, 1789, nobles and clergy, in a remarkable session, renounced their privileges. Feudalism was officially abolished. This was a massive step towards equality. Later that month, on August 26th, the Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This historic document was inspired by Enlightenment ideals and the American Declaration of Independence. It proclaimed that all men were born and remain free and equal in rights. It guaranteed rights such as liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. It also asserted the principle of popular sovereignty, that power ultimately rests with the people. This declaration became a cornerstone of the revolution. It was a beacon of hope for a new society. However, King Louis XVI was reluctant to accept these radical changes. He delayed approving the declaration and the August decrees. Food shortages in Paris remained severe. On October 5th, 1789, a large crowd of women, demanding bread, marched from Paris to Versailles. They were armed with pikes and even cannons. They stormed the palace and forced the royal family to return with them to Paris. The king and queen became virtual prisoners in the Tuileries Palace. This event shifted the center of power from Versailles to Paris. Under the watchful eye of the revolutionary populace, the National Assembly continued its work of reforming France. It reorganized the country into new administrative districts called departments. It reformed the legal system. Crucially, it addressed the financial crisis by seizing church lands and selling them. In 1790, it passed the civil constitution of the clergy. This measure brought the Catholic Church under state control. Priests were to be elected and paid by the state. This deeply divided the clergy and many devout Catholics. It created new enemies for the revolution. The path of reform was proving to be a rocky one, filled with both progress and conflict. Section 7. The Descent into Darkness, the Reign of Terror. The revolution, which had begun with such high hopes for liberty and reform, took a darker turn. In June 1791, King Louis XVI and his family attempted to flee France. They were caught at Varennes, near the border. This escape attempt shattered any remaining illusions about the king's loyalty to the revolution. Many now saw him as a traitor. Calls for a republic, a France without a king, grew louder. Political divisions deepened. Radical factions like the Jacobins, led by figures such as Maximilien Robespierre, gained influence. They argued that the revolution was not yet complete. War further radicalized the revolution. In April 1792, France declared war on Austria and Prussia. These monarchies feared the spread of revolutionary ideas. Early French defeats and threats from foreign powers created an atmosphere of panic and paranoia in Paris. In August 1792, a mob stormed the Tuileries Palace. The monarchy was overthrown. Louis XVI was imprisoned. The National Convention was elected to write a new republican constitution. In September, news of an advancing Prussian army led to the September massacres. Mobs broke into prisons and slaughtered over 1,000 suspected counter-revolutionaries. In January 1793, Louis XVI was tried for treason by the National Convention. He was found guilty and executed by guillotine. This act sent shockwaves across Europe. It marked a point of no return for the revolution. The convention faced mounting challenges: foreign wars, internal rebellions, and economic crisis. To deal with these threats, it created the Committee of Public Safety in April 1793. This committee, dominated by Robespierre, effectively became the government of France. It was granted vast powers to defend the revolution. This set the stage for a period of extreme violence. What followed was the Reign of Terror. From September 1793 to July 1794, the Committee of Public Safety ruthlessly suppressed all opposition. Anyone suspected of being an enemy of the revolution could be arrested and executed. The guillotine became a chilling symbol of this period. Thousands were put to death, including Queen Marie Antoinette, moderate revolutionaries, and ordinary citizens accused on flimsy evidence. Robespierre justified the terror as necessary to create a republic of virtue, but it became a bloody dictatorship. The revolution had begun to devour its own children. The promise of liberty seemed lost in a sea of blood. Section 8. The Aftermath, a nation transformed. The Reign of Terror could not last. Robespierre's ruthlessness created enemies even within the revolutionary government. Fearful for their own lives, members of the National Convention turned against him. On July 27, 1794, 9 Thermidor in the revolutionary calendar, Robespierre and his allies were arrested. The next day, they too faced the guillotine. This marked the end of the terror, an event known as the Thermidorian reaction. A wave of relief swept through France. The excesses of the radical phase of the revolution were over. People were tired of the bloodshed and instability. France then entered a new phase. A more moderate government, known as the Directory, was established in 1795. It was a republic, but it struggled with corruption, economic problems, and ongoing wars. The Directory was weak and unpopular. It relied heavily on the army to maintain order. This created an opportunity for ambitious military leaders. One such leader was a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte. He had risen to prominence through his brilliant military victories. In 1799, Napoleon seized power in a coup d'etat. The French Revolution, as a period of popular uprising, was effectively over. Despite its chaotic and violent course, the French Revolution profoundly transformed French society. The old feudal system was gone forever. The privileges of the nobility and clergy were abolished. The principle of equality before the law was established, at least in theory. Church lands were confiscated and sold, leading to a wider distribution of property. The revolution fostered a strong sense of French nationalism. People began to see themselves as citizens of a nation rather than subjects of a king. The ideals of liberty and equality, though often betrayed, left a lasting imprint. The revolution also brought significant administrative and legal reforms. The Napoleonic Code, a new legal system introduced under Napoleon, incorporated many revolutionary principles such as equality before the law and religious toleration. It influenced legal systems across Europe and beyond. The centralized state, with its departments and bureaucracy, was a creation of the revolution. Education was reformed, the metric system was introduced. While Napoleon would eventually crown himself emperor, France would never return to the Ancien Regime. The changes were too deep, too fundamental. Section 9. Echoes through time, the revolution's enduring legacy. The French Revolution did not just change France. Its impact rippled across the globe, shaping the course of modern history. The ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, unleashed by the revolution, inspired countless other movements for independence and social reform. From Latin America to Eastern Europe, people fighting for their rights looked to the French example. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen became a model for similar declarations in other countries. It challenged the legitimacy of monarchies and empires everywhere. It planted the seeds of democracy. Of course, the legacy of the French Revolution is complex and contested. It demonstrated the power of popular movements to overthrow oppressive regimes, but it also showed the dangers of revolutionary extremism and the ease with which idealism can descend into violence and tyranny. The Reign of Terror remains a stark warning. The rise of Napoleon showed how revolutions can sometimes lead to new forms of authoritarian rule. Historians continue to debate its successes and failures, its triumphs and its tragedies. Was it worth the immense human cost? There is no simple answer. In France itself, the revolution laid the foundations for a modern secular republic. The struggle between republicanism and monarchism continued throughout the 19th century, but the principles of 1789 eventually triumphed. The revolution's emphasis on national unity and a strong central state continues to shape French politics. The values it proclaimed, liberty, equality, fraternity, remain the official motto of France. They are taught in schools and celebrated on Bastille Day, July 14th, the national holiday. The memory of the revolution is deeply embedded in French identity. Today, more than 2 centuries later, the French Revolution still speaks to us. It reminds us of the enduring human desire for freedom and justice. It reminds us of the fragility of social order and the power of ideas to change the world. It also serves as a cautionary tale about the passions that can be unleashed when societies undergo rapid transformation. The dark secrets of the revolution, its violence and its terror, are as much a part of its legacy as its noble ideals. Understanding this tumultuous period helps us to understand the world we live in today, a world still grappling with the very questions the French Revolution raised so dramatically.